Good evening, everyone. It's a delight to see the buzz and to hear about the buzz around tonight's event. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I am Shalini Kemker. I'm the Chief Executive and the founder of E2E. And I'd like to thank you all very much for joining me and my team this evening for our virtual reception with my friend and the financial trailblazer, and she is a trailblazer, and the first ever female CEO of Lloyds of London, Dame Ingebile. She's done some amazing things, amazing work in modernising Lloyds and the business world around her. And her work underscores that success and good business ethics aren't in opposition. When we do well by our customers, clients, and our employees, success inevitably follows us. I hope you'll agree with that. And this is something I'm learning from Dame Inga. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to our service office partner, IWG UK PLC, and to Richard Morris, the gentleman that you can hopefully all see. He is the Chief Executive of IWG UK, and he's going to speak for a few minutes to tell you about our partnership and some of the great offers that we have for the E2E members. So quickly, in terms of the format of this evening, I'm going to formally introduce Richard and ask him to say a few words. Then we're going to do a short poll. Dame Inga, we're going to do a short poll to ask a few questions. And then it'll be my pleasure to introduce Dame Inga as our keynote speaker and as our guest of honour. We'll follow this with a Q&A, so be ready for an interactive 30-minute session, which is the Q&A. So during the Q&A, please could you raise your hand? So you'll see at the bottom of the Zoom function the opportunity to raise your hand, and then you can ask a question. We'll unmute you, and I think we're going to try for the first time to see whether we can see you and make you into a panelist. So if you'd like the camera on, leave your camera on. If you don't wish to, you can always switch it off. I know when I haven't got my makeup on, I don't like being on the camera. So it's entirely your call whether you like to have your face shown if it works. You can also use the Q&A button. You'll see there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom software, and you'll find that by using that, you can also ask questions which we will then ask you to speak. But before I do that, I'd like to start by thanking all of you for taking the time to join us. At the moment, we live in very difficult times. And whilst being an entrepreneur can be isolating at the best of times, the soft lockdown and often the hard lockdown in some of the cities that our members are in is putting a lot of stress on all of us. And it's through this sort of camaraderie and collaboration that we bring people together. I hope you'll agree. So evenings like this, where we can discuss challenges, and we'll discuss challenges. Dame Inga is going to talk a little bit about risk, celebrate successes, and learn from one another has never been so important. So I'm personally inspired by the resilience and determination of our members. We've got over 200 people registered for this evening, and many of our members, as well as new people. Therefore, by way of quick introduction, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about E2E for those of you who are new. So E2E, the best way for me to describe us is the Match.com of investment and capital. So whether you're raising investment in terms of financial investment, whether you're looking for capital in terms of human capital or technology or services, our reason for being is to connect you, and our business is your business. We've helped businesses all over the world. Hopefully some of you have experienced it, to find investment, to find talent, and to find ways to connect with one another to grow your businesses. Our partnerships, they help us to find the best services and the best technology to take our businesses that are our members to the next level. And the best thing about it is we're trying to do this at mates rates, so as discounted as possible. So if you need capital, whether it's human, finance, technology, or services, please do write to me or any of my team. For those of you that don't know, we have 23,000 members now. It's taken us about 9 years to build our membership. Our members contribute £213 billion to the UK economy, and they employ 1.15 million people. In addition to that, it's my personal mission to ensure that Britain is the best place in the world to start and grow a business, especially when times are tough. So In addition to providing these virtual events like today, and access to finance, access to non-execs and one-to-one support for our members, I've been fortunate enough to have a direct line into government and Number 10 during the last 6 months, and to try and influence some of the changes that we've needed on the government packages, the COVID packages. I've been sharing something called the Business Actions Employee Retention Skills Recommendation Group. And one of our key successes, which I hope many of our members have enjoyed, has been the Flexi Furlough. So that was introduced in July. My working group on the employee retention group, which Richard is also part of that group, we've also been successful in introducing the short-timed directive. So if you heard from the Chancellor last week, he mentioned that rather than making people unemployed, we can choose to reduce their hours. And by reducing their hours, there's a top-up from the government as well as the employer. And that's what's called a short-time working initiative. So hopefully many of you will be able to utilize that and have our staff ready for when the economy goes back to some sense of normality. Obviously, we're offering online events and we're developing a huge number of new features. At the moment, the great thing is membership is free for E2E. When we launch these new online features, we will continue the free membership, but we will also introduce an upgraded level of membership, which again, we've tried to keep affordable at £25 a month. And that will give you roughly £24,000 of support if you wish to avail it, and in some cases, much, much more. So for example, Richard will talk about it, but if you take an office with IWG, anywhere in the UK, you have 3 months free on a 6-month contract. If you become a member of E2E and you're not already, you have unlimited access to their business lounges. So Richard, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about our collaboration. We'll then go on to do the poll, and then it'll be my pleasure, Dame Inga, to introduce you to lead an interactive conversation. So I'll hand over to Richard now, if I may.
Shalini, thank you very much indeed. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our event. I have to say, first of all, that at IWG, which stands for International Workplace Group, we're very proud long-term partners of E2E. And we've been on this incredible journey over the last 4 or 5 years where we've combined our sort of physical infrastructure of places of work, places where entrepreneurs and investors and business people gather with a fantastic program of events that Shalini and her team have led on. And one day in the future, I hope that we can get back on the road and have those events again with lots of people in the same place. But for now, we are progressing with our virtual events program. I just want to say a little bit about IWG, and then, as Shalini said, I'll talk a little more about our partnership and the benefits that we provide to E2E members. IWG is the world's largest provider of flexible workspace. Think of it as sort of on-demand, pay-as-you-go workspace. And we've spent the last decade or so, particularly the last 5 years, building this unique global platform, this unique network of 4,000 workplaces in 120 countries, in 1,200 cities, right across the globe. And the idea is that the way in which businesses want to be able to obtain and consume workspace is changing. It was changing already before the pandemic as a result of digitalization, increasing the mobility of workers, which was really making the old model of signing long-term leases for properties and companies trying to just take a view on what their needs would be in the long term. But we provide on-demand pay-as-you-go workspace across our network. In the UK, our network is 400 locations across 100 towns and cities. And the really interesting and relevant thing in today's environment is that you can use this network using a smartphone app and pay for the workspace that you need, where you need it, when you need it, by the hour, by the day, or however long you wish. Now, I imagine that right now, all around the world, workers, bosses, governments are trying to work out what the future of work looks like. And it's fair to say they're coming to radically different conclusions as well. Our strong view is that the future of work, off the back of this unbelievable change in all of our lives that we've experienced over the last few months, the future of work, the world of work and how people work will change forever. And we believe that our network of on-demand workspace will enable business people and companies and employers to be able to provide a hybrid between working from home some of the time, working nearer to home a lot of the time, and maybe only now and again going into some kind of company head office. So what I would like to do is to offer some fantastic opportunities for you to use our network as an E2E member. And as Shalini touched on before, we're very proud to provide all E2E members with 3 months free on all of our different packages. These are different types of membership products to use our lounge network, private office space in any one of our 400 locations in the UK. And we're offering 3 months free on that for any E2E members that take a contract for 6 months or more. Also offering free unlimited access for the next 6 months to our network of business lounges. That includes our airport lounges in the UK. Interestingly, you're never more than 20 minutes away from one of our business lounges traveling on the main motorway network in the UK. We're also offering 10% discount on any meeting room hire in one of our 400 locations in the UK, and 10% discount on booking a day office anywhere in the UK as well. And a day office is a really good way if you get a bit sort of fed up working from home all of the time. You can look up on your smartphone, find a day office, book it just like a hotel room on a short stay basis, costs about 30 quid, and you have high quality, professional, conveniently located workspace on many of your doorsteps. So look, that's what we have to offer. That's how we work in partnership very proudly with E2E. And thank you. I'll hand over back to Shalini now.
Richard, thank you very, very much, and wishing IWG all the success going forward, and brilliant to be partnering with you. So thank you. Richard, I know that you won't be able to stay for the whole evening, but please do stay for as much as you like. What I would say to the participants is my colleague Sean Dolan is on the chat function, so if you've got any questions on the membership or on the partnership with IWG, if you use the chat function and message him, that would be great. So now, the star of the show, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know her over the last 3 years on the Mayor of London's Business Advisory Board. I'm delighted and I'm honoured to introduce, and I feel very lucky, Dame Inga, that you're taking the time today to spend with us, to introduce the fabulous, and she is fabulous, Dame Ingebile. She's the former CEO of Lloyds of London. She's a British businesswoman with over 3 decades of experience in the financial services sector, and who now has a portfolio of executive director roles in the UK and with international companies. Inga, if you don't mind me calling you Inga for a minute, led the global insurance market through a dramatic period of modernisation, opening Lloyds of London's innovation labs, expanding the company's global services, and challenging, which I love, the old boys club and the old school image of the 330-year-old institution. So before joining Lloyds, Dame Inga, she held a variety of international leadership positions for GE Insurance Solutions before becoming the group chief executive of the Swiss reinsurer Converium. She was then moving on to the global management board of Zurich Insurance Group until she became the group chief executive of Canopius, one of the top insurers in the Lloyds market. As the first female CEO of Lloyds, she has played a key role in challenging the cultural perceptions and highlighting the importance of diversity and inclusion. And she's a massive champion for diversity and inclusion. Under her leadership, Lloyds launched many diversity initiatives, including, I hope many of you have heard of it, the Dive In Festival. She grew to become, that actually grew to become the only worldwide insurance diversity and inclusion event. She has been, as you can see, made a Dame of the British Empire for her services to business and insurance, and it's incredible to have her with us today. I'm sorry it's not in person, but actually by doing it this way, we're in the comfort of our own homes, and I think you have a lot of people who are interested in your journey, Dame Inga. So I'm going to ask Dame Inga to lead the discussion. Thank you, Dame Inga. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Shalini. And I thought there might be a poll, but is the poll coming later?
Oh, sorry, I've forgotten about the poll. I tell you what, let's start with your talk and then we'll do the poll afterwards. I think the gist is there. That's all right. Yeah.
No problem at all.
Thanks.
Well, I'm going to cover a few topics today, but first of all, I want to talk about the world of risk, because I've been in the insurance sector for nearly 38 years, and risk is it's all we focus on, really. And I was being surrounded by doing global insurance all over the world, so always looking at the latest thing that was happening in the world, wherever it was. But looking back, I just think we were actually a bit risk averse, which seems so weird because we're meant to be helping businesses like yours lay off the risk to someone who's willing to take on the risk. But somehow we have failed a little bit in that we're not always so open to some of the new risks. And when I think about this, I was also reflecting on my life, and I wondered how much of a risk taker I've actually been. And when I look at some of the real pioneers out there, you know, the entrepreneurs like all of you who are inventing and investing in groundbreaking things, I sort of think maybe I haven't been much of a great risk taker. I've worked in insurance for most of my career, but I think some of the decisions I made seemed quite risky to me. And I guess that's how we have to view things, that, you know, it's all relative. And I do remember, particularly around one of my career decisions, I'm going back to the year 1990. So I don't know how many of you actually were alive then or working then, but I started working in 1982. So by 1990, I'd been in the London insurance market for 8 years. And there was an incident that occurred at work that I felt was so sexist that I thought, I don't want to work here anymore. And so I left the office one day. I did storm out. I didn't return. I felt angry. I felt excluded. And I promised myself, actually, I would never return to the world of insurance, as I didn't feel I was welcome there. I bought a round the world flight ticket, it just lasted a year, and providing you kept moving in roughly the same direction around the globe, you could eventually end up back at home. And I left in a hurry. As I said, it wasn't planned. I didn't know what route I was going to take, but my first stop was Mumbai, or Bombay as it was called in those days. Now, this was a bit of a shock in itself. I was a lone female backpacker wandering the streets of Mumbai. And then over several months, I traveled through India. I then started to visit some other countries, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Thailand. And then after some months, I went to Australia, and then within the year, went by the US and was back in London. I did actually get offered my old job back by my boss. Hence, 38 years later, you know, I retired from the world of insurance. But looking back, this was probably a bit of a risk at the time. I was 27 years old. I didn't know what I was going to do. But what I learned during that time had a really huge impact on me. And it influenced my path throughout the next 30 years, you know, almost of my life. So if there's one thing for sure that I've learned, is that taking a risk gives you huge learnings, and I believe equips you to take on bigger risks and to be perhaps yourself more creative and more innovative in the future. And anything that you experience that's outside of your comfort zone, to me, gives you the ability to see things differently, to have a different view, and to see things from other people's perspectives rather than your own. And we all have our own narrow view of certain things. But that aspect taught me about the importance of inclusion. So that's why that has also become such a big part of my life. And we know that if people hadn't been taking risks for hundreds of years, we wouldn't have seen the human progress that we have today, right? There's a lot going on, but we wouldn't have progressed to where we are today. But it does feel right now as though there is too much going on in the world, that we can hardly cope. We've got across the world, society, businesses, governments, they're confronted with a huge amount of change and enormous challenges. And these all present risks, both new and old. And we were struggling to get our arms around the latest crisis of, the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, we're struggling as businesses. And if we've got to consider all the other things that are going on, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get our arms around them all? We've got the unstable geopolitical environment that was there before the COVID-19 pandemic came along. I've worked for global firms most of my life, and I saw globalization and the increasing digital connectivity that we had across the world. I thought it was bringing us closer together. International trade has been helping drive economic growth, and it's lifted many millions out of poverty. And every country has learned, and business has been learned to rely on this international network of trade partners and political allies. And all of this sort of support, this collaboration, this doing things collectively, I believe it's brought so many benefits, but we now seem to have reached a point where retrenchment, national self-interest have become such a big threat to international stability. And now with this sort of hiatus we're in with this COVID-19 pandemic, we're wondering what the new emerging geopolitical order is going to be, right? You've got the strategic rivalry between the US and China, which is continuing to rattle along. We've got trade wars all over the place, this Russia continuing to interfere with its neighbors and beyond, allegedly using both conventional means and then cyber attacks. So there's a huge period of ongoing instability and insecurity. So business leaders, it's tough out there, this complex arena of challenges and all of this when actually we've got one of the world's really major challenges to contend with, which is climate change. And so while COVID-19 has taken so much of our time and resources over the past, few 6 months probably now, there is no bigger long-term story, I think, than the climate crisis and the threat it poses to life on Earth. And despite this, there's now a lack of agreement on the topic. You've got people not necessarily coming together to discuss it. And I do get concerned about that collaboration that we used to see between governments. I see it, I get worried because it's collapsing. But what I do therefore think is an increasing role to play for business. And I believe that business is going to be taking a lead like it never has on some of these really important issues. And I see this particularly when it comes to digitalization and using advanced technologies, where I think business is way ahead of governments. And whether it's the adoption of new technology or dealing with cybercrime, which is undoubtedly that dark underbelly of the digital revolution, I see businesses really taking the lead. As insurers, we grew up insuring and protecting physical risks, a building, a port, a ship, an aircraft. And then we started in the 20th century to insure things such as liabilities. So the world of intangible risks started to grow, and they've grown so much today that the most valuable companies have built their success not by owning physical assets, but by creating intangible assets such as software and algorithms that collect data and use it to deliver and constantly refine services. So this has been a huge challenge for us in the insurance sector to get our arms around, because we're used to assessing physical risks. Now we've got to think about this virtual world that knows no geographic boundaries. A cyber attack can affect the entire world in one go. So there's a real need for us all to think differently about the world, never mind what COVID-19 is now turning up for us. And we all need to, I think, leaders, we need to confront them, because if there's one thing that we can't do is sort of stick our head in the ground and not want to face these. I really believe that leadership today, I mean, it's always taken courage, but now it's going to need extra courage, extra stamina, I think, to get through what we need what we need to do. And I'll just now share a little bit about the leadership challenge I took on at Lloyds of London. And I know Lloyds of London, probably for many of you, is this vast thing. And you're wondering, well, does that have any relevance to me? Well, I hope that some of the stories I share will have a bit of relevance for your business. So I was hired to modernize the market, and I was hired in 2013 to introduce technology and move Lloyds from paper to digital. Now, as Shalini said, the Lloyds market is centuries old. So by the time I got there, it was already 325 years old. And in some ways, it was still operating in the same way it had for all that time, on paper. Now, this was quite a risk for me. Predecessors of mine over decades had failed to introduce technology, and heads had rolled. But it wasn't that the people at the top, it wasn't that the board and the CEOs or the previous CEOs didn't want to make the change. It was the wall of resistance that had been so rigid from those working in the market that the CEOs had spent millions and millions of pounds and yet repeatedly failed to achieve the transformation required. So just to put some of this in a bit more context, I'm going to take you right back in time. I'm going to take you to a time that could hardly be more different to the world we're in today, using technology to communicate with each other. The year is 1688, and we are in Tower Street in the City of London. It's now the financial district of London. This street leads to the Tower of London, and Tower Street was at the heart of London's maritime community. It was close to the River Thames, the custom house, the wharves where all the goods were stored for all the shipping that went on. And this street was lined with the fine houses of traders and professionals who ran businesses from their homes in those days. And one of these businesses was a coffee shop owned by Edward Lloyd. And ships, captains and owners and merchants would gather at Mr. Lloyd's coffee house to get reliable shipping news because, you know, the sea was a very treacherous place. And these men, as they were all men in those days, were eager to get the latest news on whose ship or cargo had been the latest victim to the weather or perhaps to pirates. And it was where the sharing of risk began. And I think of it as sort of an early crowdfunding idea because people got together just themselves without any real organization. And what happened was these voyages and the cargoes that were being shipped around, they were documented onto paper or slips, as they were called. And then a sort of insurance premium was set, and the underwriters wrote down on that slip, underneath the details of the voyage, what percentage of the risk they were prepared to accept. And then they signed their name against it. Hence the name underwriter was born, so they kept signing under. And that meant they received their percentage of the premium, but they also had to pay out their percentage if anything was lost at sea. Now, that was all done, as I said, on paper, people signing their names. Fast forward now to 2013, what had changed? Well, Lloyd's, now housed in a modern building, it's a building in the, again, I said in the City of London near the Bank of England. It looks rather like an oil rig. It's often called by kids as the inside out building, as all the pipework and utilities, lifts and everything are on the outside. Some people hate it, some people love it. But what is important about it is that it houses a real marketplace. So it's got an open atrium and it's got 5 floors all connected with escalators. Pre-COVID, of course, this was, but it was a live marketplace. So thousands of brokers and underwriters would meet daily, talk, do business in the same way as in the 17th century. And a lot of business gets traded through there. So it would be could have been anything like 35 billion pounds of business would be negotiated and traded on paper. So here I was hired to modernize the market, introduce technology and move Lloyd's from paper to digital. And I wasn't allowed to close it. And there was no crisis as a catalyst. So I've taken on some challenges in my life, but this was the most complex and difficult transformation I've ever taken on. Now I'll go into a little bit of detail about what we did, but I just need to also explain a little bit about Lloyd's and how it works, because it's an extraordinary organization. It's a marketplace. You've got many different stakeholders. So there's the group of employees, 1,000 strong in the central corporation. the people under my direct management as the CEO. But then you have the market itself made up of several hundred individual businesses and broking firms, entrepreneurs really, who were all trading with each other. Then, of course, you have the actual customers of the product itself. So the businesses, they might be a big business like a BP might be insuring themselves, or there might be pop stars and footballers who may insure their voices or their precious legs with Lloyd. So you've got this big complex market, and all of this, as I said, done on paper, very inefficient, multiple rekeying of data and all the rest of it. So there I was. I had to introduce technology in this live face-to-face trading environment with about 8,000 people every day meeting and negotiating face-to-face. But the big challenge was not the technology. It was about the people. And this is why things had failed in the past. It was about getting people to change the way they work. And this was one of the hardest things to do. A very old institution. So here I was, I inherited this very old institution, perhaps some might say steeped in charming traditions, some might say outdated traditions, depending on your perspective. But it was an institution that was anything but diverse. And the reason I'm telling you this is it is an important aspect of, I think, how some companies can fail to modernize. I strolled through the leadership teams of all of these hundreds of firms operating in the market. And I saw that people had been hiring people just like themselves for a very long time. They were all very similar, not only in the way they looked and spoke, but in their experiences and their viewpoints. And they were very protective about what they had. And there were no new ideas coming forward as to how to make things more modern. And so I'm absolutely convinced, really, however big or small your business is, that having a more diverse workforce is critical to making change happen and having a culture of change. Now, culture change goes hand in hand when you're modernizing a business, and you've got to get your strategy and your culture aligned. But it's important to bring everyone along with you when you're driving this change. And I found that engaging with your employees as much as possible, with your customers and suppliers, mean they can become the drivers of change instead of it being this top-down driven approach, which is what my predecessors had done. They'd come in and they'd said, this is what you're using. And of course, they hit a wall of resistance. So we created a vision within the central team, and then we got thousands of people in the market to get involved. They were involved in the consultation. It was a lengthy process. And I had to convince my board that I needed that extra time at the beginning, because they wanted me to start immediately and get going and not waste time. And out of all the conversations I had, I learned that I had to listen to these people. I had to go in and listen, and they had to be involved. And I managed to persuade my board to give me that extra time. And of course, what happened was taking that extra time at the beginning meant actually when we started the work, it started to just roll and roll and roll. And we beat our budget, our budget restrictions in terms of money, and we delivered often ahead of time. So it was a fantastic effort driven by the people. And one of the things that struck me was when we did draw out this big vision at the beginning, huge amount of detail, 16 different work streams or something we wanted to work on. And I said, how am I going to communicate this complex picture to so many people? I realized it was way too complicated. I needed to simplify it. And so one of the toughest decisions again at the beginning was to reduce 16 down to 4 key work streams. Really tricky because people had been involved, that, as I said, I'd consulted them all, but I had to communicate to them that we had to prioritize and get that message out. And when you're doing a lot of change like this, you have to communicate constantly. And so you have to get the message as simple as possible. And it was the right thing to do because it enabled us to deliver, as I said, on time and in budget on certain things, win people over, and then we could start on the next things. So we actually managed to do it, but that communication was critical, and updating them all the time, keeping them up to speed with what was going on. We had to, of course, start hiring lots of new talent. because we needed new digital talent, and we knew that tech talent didn't tend to look to insurance for that fascinating, rewarding career. So that was a challenge in itself, to sort of reinvent ourselves as something modern and vibrant, not something stuck in the past. One of the other things that it surprised me, though, about driving this change was that it wasn't necessarily the young generation who were excited about the project, because I assumed, because they're all using their mobile phones and everything's online for them, I thought they would be the most engaged. But in fact, they were some of the most fearful about the change, because for them, they were saying, the jobs are going to change. I've only just started out in my career. You know, they saw that they weren't going to have a job. So we needed to take away that threat and show the future was really exciting and they could be part of it. So we got them, the young generation, involved in actually designing the jobs of the future, determining the new skills and capabilities. And then, of course, we had to ensure we gave them the opportunities to learn these new skills and perhaps have a chance to do a new job that they hadn't thought of before. And that was what we did. And when you're an entrepreneur, you'll have more experimentation and creativity, and you'll have fewer fixed rules, and you're probably always changing things, and you're going, gosh, you know, but why is it so difficult? Well, I can tell you, when you've got a massive, very old established organization, they don't really like to take risk, and they want everything to be perfect. They don't allow failure. And this idea of bringing in this more sort of this spirit back, where we're going to try things and we're going to be agile, and we're going to have this whole new vibrant culture was a tough one. Many of you see failure as a learning. Well, it wasn't seen like that. You know, you see it as one of the best things to have tried out, because you've learned from your failure. But it was a huge issue for me to get very traditional board members to get comfortable with this fresh approach. We were going to have all these new digitally savvy people who trying out new things all the time. And that was why we put the innovation lab in. And many established companies have done labs outside of their main environment because they think it needs to be down in a warehouse somewhere. I said, no, I need it right at the heart of Lloyd's. It needs to be in the center of that marketplace, right under everyone's noses. And so that's what we did. So that was a big culture change, and it was a real impact, because there was such a strict dress code that one of the hottest, most difficult decisions for the team working in the Lloyd's lab, one of the most difficult things they had to contend with was, were they going to allow digitally savvy natives in jeans and t-shirts to come into the Lloyd's building, because otherwise it was a suit and tie environment. So these are things, but I said, no, we're going to have it at the center. It's going to be under everyone's noses, and they're going to be having to look at people coming in jeans and t-shirts. So it was very, very interesting. But of course, there's a lot of change going on. So for me, it was important to keep tabs on things. I wanted to feel the pulse. So I introduced reverse mentors for me and my executive team. And these are people who are new into their career and not wise, old, experienced business people. And they became our mentors. And every 6 months, I had a new mentor. And they weren't afraid of telling me what wasn't working and what people really thought. And I learned such a lot through these mentors. Well, first of all, they introduced me to social media. They also talked about the blockers in the organization who wanted to run things in a traditional way. They didn't give away any names, so I never asked for any names of anyone, because it wasn't a witch hunt. It wasn't about going after people, but they told me about what they wanted as a new culture, what they desired, and how they wanted much more flexibility. They wanted to be free, to be the best they can be, not to have to conform to some of these very old-fashioned behaviors that they were seeing from their line managers. And therefore I thought, gosh, I've really got to do something about this culture of inclusion, because this young generation who are just starting out, sometimes they were only in, say, their first 6 months of their apprenticeship, first time they were in the business world, and they were just saying things that, you know, you don't realize have been going on, particularly when you've been working for so many decades like I had. And I realized then that I needed to do something to positively promote inclusion, to positively talk about diversity in the workplace, in Lloyd's. And I believe there is no excuse for not continuing to challenge yourself, particularly when you perhaps aren't accepting of people who are different to you. And my own experience from earlier, which is when I talked about that time where I left the insurance market, that young Inga that so didn't want to stay in insurance because she felt excluded because of no role models, because of the behaviors, because of the banter. That young Inga, that image is still very firmly imprinted on my mind. And over the years, some of the women I talked to have chosen to leave the world of insurance, of finance, because of the banter they consider to be demeaning, sexist, some of the behaviors that go on. They say, I don't want to tolerate this. And I've had an amazing career in insurance, and I've learned the power of engaging with people and including them. And so when I joined Lloyds, I thought, I've got to do something bigger and more important than just introducing technology. So I started to talk about the power of inclusion at employee town halls. I talked about the lack of women in leadership roles. I started talking about looking out on a sea of white faces and why weren't there more black and brown ones. I started using words like gay and lesbian and bisexual, and first of all, there were giggles and perhaps heads bowed in slight embarrassment. But I didn't stop, and our employees realized suddenly, actually, she means it. But do you know what? We can actually talk about these topics. We can use some of these words that may have been taboo before. And these people, they were empowered now. They felt empowered. They started their own networks of people like them. And I remember particularly the launch of our Pride at Lloyds group, our LGBT network. It was launched one evening and we had some speeches and it was a celebration. And one of the men who was there, an older guy, he'd been working at Lloyds for about 30 years. And he came up to me with a slight tear in his eye. And he said, Inga, thank you. I never thought I would see this happen in Lloyds. I never thought I would see this day. This is quite amazing. And I thought he was going to tell me how he'd come out of the closet for the first time. But instead, he told me that his son was gay. And for years, he'd not felt able to talk about it openly at work. He'd pretended that his son was heterosexual for fear of judgment or perhaps for fear of some nasty banter in the office. And I was delighted that he had now come out about his son. But isn't that sad, as that was only about 6 years ago? But it also shows the power of employees. So what you can do if you get your employees, you get your people engaged, they can liberate and empower others. And sometimes in a way that we might not have expected. And of course, today it's never been as important to talk about things such as race and the racial tension we have in the world today. And most of you may be looking at a video screen. Some of you may just be joining with audio, but for those of you who can see me, I'm a white woman. And yet I am horrified and disgusted by the racism I have seen and read about. And I grew up in a white community. I can only try to imagine what it's like to grow up being black in the US or the UK or so many other civilized, so-called civilized societies. I look at the Black Lives Matter protests that are going on around the world, and I seriously hope they will make a difference. I hope they will spark a change in attitudes and behaviors to bring about a world of equality, because I believe it's way overdue. And there is a role for business to play here, a role for all of us in business to play here. There are discriminations in communities and in society at large, but there is still a lot of discrimination and racism going on in the world of work. And an organization's culture can change. It is a direct reflection of our leadership. So it absolutely, at the top, we are responsible, but also from an individual perspective, there's a lot that can be done, whatever role you have in an organization. So we can all be role models. Every single one of us can influence and make change happen. Every single one of us can speak up when we think there's inappropriate behavior being displayed, something feels wrong in the organization. We can be an ally for someone not like us. And I want to continue to be able to use my influence to make the world a better, more inclusive and equal one, which is why I will continue to be outspoken about this topic. Now, my message to you is do what you can to make a difference, because if you do it in your business, and there is a diversity dividend. And I know with an entrepreneurial community, you need innovation, you need creativity, and you are those. And I bet that more people you surround yourself that are different to you, your creativity will be stimulated, your innovation will be stimulated. And then we keep this entrepreneurial spirit going, and we keep doing pioneering things and keep making the world a better place for us. So getting those new voices around the table is I have found the best way to tackle business challenges, and I think more broadly the challenges that we're all facing with in the wider world. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm now going to hand back to Shalini. Thank you.
Dame Inga, you made me feel very emotional. It's very good of you, the way you've described it. I couldn't agree more with everything you've said. I think the thing that I've learned today is you are a pioneer. You are a change maker, and I think maybe my team are going to shoot me for saying this, but I'd like to challenge us to get a much bigger audience, like a few thousand people listening to you saying these things, because we need more people saying what you're saying. And diversity and inclusion is becoming much more on the radar, but as you're saying, there's still a gap. And the more we can close that gap, and the change that we create by having more diverse organizations is game changing. So you've talked not just about diversity, but some of the things that you've done as a pioneer at Lloyd's, which I hadn't realized. It must have been very difficult to make those changes. So I commend you and congratulate you for what you've achieved. And I'm so glad I've heard you speaking today for the first time. And genuinely, I'm feeling emotional. So I'm now going to go on to the poll. And I know that Dinesh Damija is on the line. He would like to talk to you. There's quite a few people who are asking. So I'm going to kick off with the poll, followed by Dinesh Damija, followed by Craig Lemon, and then I will say the other people who'd like to speak. So can we kick off, Stephen, if you wouldn't mind, with the poll, and then Dinesh, I'm going to ask you to open up. So this is a quick poll. Just want you to answer, to take a pick of 1, 2, or 3. There's multiple choice. I'm interested in E2E because the events are very informative and educational. I make valuable, high quality connections. I make use of the membership benefits, or none of the above. And the next one, which of the below services would you need the most? Business services and consultations, lawyers, accountants, consultants, receiving flexi mentoring. Dame Inga's been talking about mentoring. I couldn't agree more, the importance of mentors. Finding a non-exec director, meeting like-minded individual or like-minded people, fundraising, offering your services to our members, as that's what's most important to you, and none of the above. Third question, which of the following would you benefit, following services would benefit you? Real-time private market data, sales intelligence software, digital marketing, web hosting, customer relationship management software, startup and SME data intelligence, none of the above. Would you benefit from discounted access to physical or virtual office packages or meeting rooms and access to business lounges, yes or no? And depending on the answers that you put, we'll be in touch with you to try and help you make some of those introductions to those services or people. And if there's anything else that you think we should be doing, please drop a little message in the chat function in the Q&A to Sean, or drop us an email afterwards. And we'll share the results of the poll around 7:15 when we close up, if that's all right. So I'm going to leave that running and ask you to just take a minute. Dame Inga, you and I can't fill it in, unfortunately, but the participants can. And I'm going to ask if we can go across to Dinesh. Dinesh, I'm going to see, we haven't done this before, but we'll see if we can make you on the panel so that we can see you, if you would like that, or we can keep it just audible. Would you like to go on? And would you like to open your video?
Audio. Right.
There we go. Hi, Dinesh. Lovely to see you.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for that really nice talk, Dame Inga. As a first generation BAME immigrant, I can understand a bit of what you went through in your earlier years at Lloyd's. Having also been to a cloistered boarding school in King's Canterbury in Cambridge, I know how, in the late 60s and early 70s how it felt. But my question is that starting something new is far easier than changing something old. It's double the effort. You know, I had with e-bookers, I had flight bookers, and I left flight bookers in that I left someone to run it while I started e-bookers anew, and then took over flight bookers. So did you ever think of starting a new small Lloyd's to get and then to go and take over the old.
We did actually talk about it. And one of the things I did talk about with a very, very small group of people, not the major consultation of the thousands, was to sort of have a dark, like the dark web, like a dark Lloyd's that we would secretly build, because I thought that might be a way to modernize. So you build this parallel universe, start getting people to use that, and then it sort of flips over and becomes the main tool. But with Lloyd's being so public, in other words, it's not like a PLC where everything is secret. You have to communicate everything all the time to the members, because you're sort of owned by the thousands of members and names at Lloyd's. And so it's quite difficult to do anything secretly. But I actually did think about that as a way to get the technology into Lloyd's. Now, since I've left Lloyd's and we've actually introduced the technology, there are now, and they weren't my ideas, I haven't formed them, but there are now some new exchanges that have been produced, built just from new, that are now challenging Lloyd's. Yeah, so that has happened.
Thank you.
Dinesh, thank you very much. And
Oh, I just wanted to add something. Sorry, so I just, Dinesh, when you said about changing old businesses, yes. And of course, the other thing that's so difficult is when people feel there's nothing wrong with it. So in other words, actually Lloyd's was very successful. It wasn't really broken. It was working, people were making money. But if you look into the future, or you could see that it wasn't sustainable unless it did something. And that's the tricky thing, when you've got to get people to realize that actually it's not now I'm worried about, because we are doing well, but in 5 to 10 years time, we're going to be left behind. And that was a really tough thing to convince people that we needed to do it.
As a follow-up, did the figures go through the roof after you changed?
In terms of revenues and things like that?
Yeah, yes.
Or, yeah, in terms of business. Well, insurance is a very cyclical business. So you don't always grow the top line. And insurance premiums can go up following events. So it's quite difficult to actually ascertain what growth, but yes, there are digital syndicates now within the Lloyd's market when there weren't before. So you're getting new business flows in, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dinesh. I'm going to move on. Dinesh, great to see you. And then thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask if Craig Lemon is there. I think he has a question. And then I'll move on to Dame Marsha. There's lots of people now, Dame Inga, so we'll keep the, if you could introduce yourself. Craig, are you there? Craig? Has he been made live? No. Yes, he's there. Hi, Craig. You just need to unmute. You've got your mute button on.
Yeah, sorry about that. I got knocked off and had to reconnect. Yeah, not many people make me feel old, Dame Inga, but you did there at the moment when you started talking about the early 90s, and I realised I started my first business in 1986, thanks to Maggie Thatcher's Enterprise Allowance Scheme. So yeah, and having lived abroad as well, starting a business at that time was different. You brought a lot of, I lived in Germany, so I brought a lot of culture, personality of businesses, honesty, integrity, which Scottish people are kind of known for anyway, but I applied that into a business. And I built a business basically from then on, when people are better than me. And I always employed people that are better than me. The culture is driven by a lot of people who do that in your business. And I've been through a lot of recessions. So I've started a new company called MyGen, which is about enhancing the quality of later life living, particularly the mental well-being of our aging population. So it's basically a new start for old farts. And as we've kind of been going through this whole thing of evolving and trying to raise money, which I've never really had to do before, I've seen that the risk during the pandemic is starting to get tighter, that people are looking at to become more risk averse. Are you seeing that in London as well for companies trying to raise money?
Right. I think there's lots of things going on, because there are also lots of banks and financiers who are actually focusing on certain groups. So I've just been involved in a call this week where I learned all about a fund that is going to be created just to invest in BAME backed businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I see is a sort of shift, not an overall risk aversion, but maybe a shift to the way people are thinking where they want to invest their money at the moment. I would have thought anything to do with the health sector, anything to do with climate, carbon neutral economy stuff, anything like that. I think there'll be money for. I don't sense here in London that there's an overall risk aversion.
Yeah,
I just think they're looking at different sectors.
There's kind of been a stutter. We started a fundraising, we were doing quite well. And then in March and April, everyone just seemed to hunker down. So it's getting, I think it's getting back out there. I'm hoping it's going to pick up again, because one of the things I think we can talk about cultures and everything, but once a business is under pressure, the first thing that suffers is culture. People kind of regress into what they know when they should actually be more outgoing and evolving more people into the business. So while we kind of look at the pandemic as being a societal disaster, I think we run the risk that businesses are going to be really badly wounded coming out of this.
Yeah, and I think what I felt happened at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there was a sense of panic. People were really panicking, and so things I did think got halted. But when people realized this was going to be a marathon, not a sprint, I think things started to move again. But you're right, I believe there was a time when there was panic and people stopped all sorts of things.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very useful.
Great, thank you. Great to see you. And it looks like you're in a busy environment there. So
I'm stuck in the garage. Unfortunately, when we went lockdown, I'd invited my daughters and the two of their boyfriends to move into our house with us for a year so they could save money for a deposit for the house. And then COVID came along. So I actually have to kind of self-isolate in my garage, office, studio, where I fix my car. Yeah.
Well, what you're doing to bring the aging population into technology is amazing. So I wish you every success.
Thank you. It's been a really interesting journey. 65,000 users across the globe, and they all tell personal stories that really are insightful and emotional. It's a wonderful thing to be doing in your later years.
Thank you very much. Still very young, Craig, so I wouldn't say that. Okay, I'm going to ask my mother, Dame Asha. She's not got her camera on, but I'm going to ask her to ask her question, Dame Inga. So it's Dame Asha. Mummy, will you put your unmute? Are you there? Are you there? No? Okay, we'll come back to Dame Asha, and we will go to Eunice. Oh, she's there. Just unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi, Mummy.
Yes, thank you, Beta. Dame Inga, my camera is switched off because, as Shalini said, I haven't got makeup on. It's just amazing to hear you. Whatever you have talked about, it's so close to my heart. I have been in education for a very long time. And everything what you said about your leadership journey, of the importance of communication and communication engagement, the changes you made, the inclusivity, the diversity, everything was just music to my ear. I want to ask a bigger and wider question. It's when we are leading an organization, we can do some of those things with difficulty, with challenges, but we can if we are leading in the right way like you did. The world is bigger and wider. Every day, as you said, we hear stories. The deep-seated racism, deep-seated issues, whether we talk about judiciary, education, or any other field you can think of. And the Black Lives Matters issue is still going on. There are cases happening almost on a daily basis in the US, in the UK. What can we do, you and I, to make change, do things for the better? So beyond rising above our own institutions, but to do something where we feel we are here, we have done this in our organizations, how can we now change the world for the better? Because I do believe that Martin Luther King's speech in 1960s can still be true when you hear some of these stories. So
well, I have started to join more networks that cut across the world. Now, I have to admit that most of them are female networks at the moment. But what I'm finding is, and there are gender differences, I mean, we're not saying that all women and all men are the same, but there do tend to be some gender differences, that women tend to be more collaborative and want to work together. And so what I've found now is that there's quite a few women's groups that are prepared to take on these topics. So I've now joined more women's networks than ever before, because I want to be part of a louder voice. And one of the forum, for instance, that I just joined, I can probably tell you offline which ones I've joined rather than give unfair advertising to some of them. But we've actually said we've got to have a serious agenda now to see what we can do to change the world. Because if you do connect influential people across the world, I think you can actually start making change happen, because people will start to listen to you. I found it amazing when we did the gender pay gap reporting, when that was launched in the UK. I can remember just shortly before the D-Day for everyone to report on the gender pay gap, I discovered that equity partners, so partners of law firms, partners of the big professional services firms who were in a partnership approach, they had excluded all of their partners because they said they were equity owners and therefore they didn't need to be included in the employees, the gender pay gap reporting. I heard this and I was furious. I mean, I really was furious. I managed to get myself on the Radio 4 Today program, and I managed to get interviewed by the Financial Times to speak up about this and said, I think this is outrageous and I think that all of these companies should have to report. Now, I got some abuse. I got some abuse from some of the law firms saying, I should keep my nose out of it, blah, 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 blah. But then I did have one of the professional services firms, they got the guy who ran the UK, he got in touch with me and he said, Inga, I listened to you. And he said, I think I want to include all of our partners, but the numbers are going to look worse because, of course, most of the senior people are men. He said, should I do it? I said, you bet you should do it, because the more transparency we have, the women aren't going to look at your firm any worse. But because you're being transparent, you're actually going to say that's good. Now, I had the ability, because of my position, my executive position, to get that airtime and make that change happen. And all the professional services firms did it. So it really made a change. How you get that without being in a position of power like I was then is a bit more tricky. And that's why I'm choosing now to use these networks across the world, because I think we can actually start to have a voice if we connect with others.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I know there are lots of questions waiting, so I'm not going to take any more of your time, but it's been inspirational to listen to you. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dame Inga. Thank you, Mummy. I'm going to move on now to Eunice Malik, followed by Javid Thomas, Francis Toy, then Bundeep Ranger, Carmen Watson's also waiting. So Eunice, if you wouldn't mind to say hi, are you there? No? Well, yes, he's there. You need to unmute, please. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Eunice.
I also have to apologize because I'm not wearing my makeup today, so respectfully. Nice to meet you. Yes, I felt left outside, so I thought I'll start with some laughter here, because after a lot of serious discussing. Inga, it's Dame Inga. It's a pleasure to see a fellow Viking here on this. I grew up in Denmark, spent 25 years there. Now, if you think about racism here in UK, imagine a teenage boy at the age of 13 arriving in Denmark in 1977. But being Punjabi Pakistani and being born in Glasgow, was made of a thick skin, so I handled it all and turned a lot of people who were kind of bullies into friends, who become lifelong friends. I was sharing some pictures of mine where I used to go on skiing holidays. Forget even Denmark. Imagine a Pakistani on the Alps in 1977 in Austria and northern
Eunice,
Italy.
you need to ask a question. We've
Yes.
got so many.
Okay, so my question is, you were talking about technology. I still feel the bigger players are lacking relating to catching up with what's happening with AI and blockchain. And a lot of people, specifically in fintech, they are nibbling away at the edges of the big industries like insurance and so on. And the second part of the question is, you were in an insurance world for a long time. Was there ever a dilemma about what type of products you could insure or companies you could insure? I mean, environment is now a big issue, so oil industry, coal, or weapons industry, or transportation of those weapons. Thank you very much for your time, and a pleasure.
Yes, so I agree, very, very slow, but it's because of these, there's a lot of old traditional companies and they've got all these amazing legacy infrastructures. When fintech started to get off the ground, that was short, you know, that they were really getting traction when I started at Lloyds. So one of the things I did was I invited a bunch of the fintech leaders at that time to come in. We had a whole evening panel discussion because I thought, again, I get them in front of this audience, people are going to be inspired. And it was a really great evening. We heard about what they were doing. And then I said, would you please come and help me? Would you come and have a look at the Lloyds market and help me to see what I can do? One of them came, one only. He spent half a day in the Lloyds market and I never heard from him again because he looked at it and he said, this is too complicated. We don't do this. We don't take these massive Goliaths and disrupt them. We do only nibble at the edges. And that's what is happening. And of course, now what's happening is a lot of the big players, anyone who's been successful in insurtech or fintech is now being bought by them. So it's a kind of, it's all a bit of a muddle, isn't it? So I agree with what you're saying there. And then now just remind me what your second, oh yes, insurance that we cover. Yes. So I can remember being at a big gathering in San Francisco. It was a big leading 80 CEOs of insurance companies globally. We met when I was there every year. This year was in San Francisco. We had a bunch of protesters barge in, they got through security, and they were protesting about coal because insurers not only insure fossil fuels and all sorts of things, but the insurance sector invests billions because of the way insurance works, of course, you collect the premiums in, you sit on it because the payment for the claim can be years out. And so you invest that money for the policyholder returns. So we've got huge funds that we invest, and we had the anti-coal campaigners in there. And that started to put a lot of pressure on insurers, and many insurers now have stopped investing in certain things. There is an argument to be said that if the only way to make them better is to be an investor and control, therefore have a say in what they're doing. So if they're a fossil fuel company, make sure they're investing a certain percentage in renewable energy and they've got a plan to get to renewable in a certain period of time. And as an investor, it's better to have a voice than not. As an insurer, we also say it's better to sometimes insure some of these risks, providing they've got a plan for changing, because we can then insist that we'll only give them insurance if they take this action and that action. And we can make things safer. So sort of mitigating things and actually being part of that journey, you know, the insurers can help, but some insurers have decided to pull out of all sorts of insurance. Tobacco, some of them won't insure tobacco firms anymore. You know, everyone's doing, a lot of them are making their own choices. There isn't a blanket decision being made. But at Lloyds, we took the choice I decided that we were going to not invest in fossil fuel anymore, for instance.
Okay, thank you very much. Pleasure. Take care.
Thanks. Nice to see you, Eunice.
Likewise.
Very well. I'm going to move over to Francis Toy, if I may, followed by Bundeep Ranger and then Javid Thomas. They've been waiting a while. So, Francis, are you live? Give it a second. No. So we'll move over, if I may, to Bundeep. Bundeep, are you there? Or Francis, are you there? Francis there. Hi, Francis. I just need to unmute.
Now, that was an interesting experience. It took me out and then we back in again. Like a previous speaker, I'm not wearing any makeup, but anyway, he stole that line from me. I run a medium-sized software company. We've just come up to just under 200 staff, and we work with the Ministry of Justice. We've been going over 20 years, so we're not quite a new company. I'm the CEO and founder. And I was very interested by your concept that the previous management hadn't updated the IT system, because we work internationally and we see IT systems that are 20 plus years old, and it's so frustrating. And I wondered, could you give me any insight into how I might persuade some of these? I mean, governments the thing about companies is they are under financial pressure to do things. But with governments, it's slightly different. How do I show them that it's really wrong?
Yeah, well, with governments, I think it's incredibly tough because they have their time horizons are usually different. Whenever we've tried to, as an insurance sector, do something with the government and build some sort of private-public partnership, they don't want to often get involved because we're saying, well, the return will be in 10 years' time, and they, of course, are in a much short-term horizon, and they don't like to commit to these massive, I mean, they obviously do make some commitments to massive projects because we have some in the UK, but I often find that time horizon is really tough. And also they tend to want to do everything in one big, huge bang. And what we did was we started to do it little by little. So not exactly like the fintechs, but we, we split it up and did it in a way that was manageable in biteable chunks.
So there's a clue there, really, to try and go to government and say, look, it's just too hard to do it as big chunks. You should do it little by little.
Yeah.
And continually. We work with prisoner probation, possibly one of the hardest areas to work in. But even during a pandemic, of course, government needs justice and they need prisons and they need probation. Yeah. So in fact, we've been very, very busy.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. But what I found was that we had to do that prioritization of this is the slither we're going to work on now. Then, hopefully deliver that. Then we can do the next. And we also didn't, we kept it all very flexible. We were always moving, and not always moving because you need a certain consistency, but we tried to have as much agility as possible. And I know that's tough.
Real benefits come out from that.
Yeah, real benefits.
Because, okay. Francis, thank you very much, Inga. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you. I'm going to move on to see if Bandeep is live now. We'll do it quickly. We've only got 3-4 minutes left. Bandeep, are you there? If not, let's move on. Javed Thomas? Javed, are you there? Oh, Bandeep's there. Bandeep, you just need to unmute.
Yeah.
Hi, Bandeep.
It kind of takes you out and takes you back in, but there we go. Okay. Cool. Thank you. That was a great session. Totally enjoyed it. Love the story about Bombay, having been born in Bombay, of course. This has a brief background and introduction. I started up Premfina, which is a competitor to PCL and Close in the premium finance space. So we finance the purchase of insurance. So it's a familiar territory. I am in that fintech and shortech category, although I'm not the person who came there for half a day and then disappeared, just for the record. And I'm also a shareholder and one of the founders of a company called Black Insurance, which is an insurance in the blockchain startup between Estonia, the UK, and Malta. So we're looking at this space very aggressively. I really want to pick up on the theme because we proudly received the Diamond Award last year from FINA for organizational excellence. And that inspired me, and Shalini, you're well aware of this. As the pandemic came and hit us, I decided that it was not something that I could sit back and watch and witness passively. It just did not seem right that we had the biggest global pandemic with half the world's population in lockdown, and we were just going to sit back and not do anything. So we started something which I, again, drew inspiration from Diven and what Inga had done at Lloyds, but this one focused on humanitarian disasters, such as public health ones. And I discovered that only 3% of natural disasters are covered by insurance. And that really hit me because I don't come from insurance. I'm a complete outsider, and that's probably my advantage. So I question everything. And one of the things I questioned was, why is something like insurance, which effectively is a peace of mind, it's the community buying in for the risk of a few, covered by that of many, and the whole idea of underwriting and syndicating risk, but yet things that hit us which are not predictable, not foreseeable, because everything in insurance is calculated on a backward basis. And when you think of things that haven't been anticipated, like a coronavirus pandemic, there's no way to react to it. So I'm curious to get your views about what can be done through technology, AI, predictive algorithms to make that somewhat predictive so we can anticipate things that have not taken place before, the known unknowns. And secondly, what we can do on a more charitable basis.
Ask you just to ask that one question because we're running out of time, if that's all right.
I just want to get her views on this thing called Insure that we started, because this was a way to basically help people suffering from such things and get the insurance industry involved on a charitable basis. And I found the uptick really, really slow and very low. We did an art auction, as you're aware, which was the world's largest online art auction for this, for charities, but the buy-in from the insurance industry has been really limited. So any insights about getting the insurance industry galvanized for charity, and anything we can do from the tech perspective to cause us to be able to react to things that have not happened before?
Yeah, well, the insurance industry is not known for being pioneering and responsive to new things. So I'm really not surprised you got that response. I don't really have any particular tips, but it's usually, you'll find some companies usually just check out who the CEO is and see how their appetite is. But on the using tech for closing the insurance gap, we call it the insurance gap because there's a massive gap. There are countries where people aren't insuring anything. There's also mature economies like the US and Japan, where actually the government takes on a whole load of the risk. And then the people say, oh, I don't need to buy insurance because the government needs my vote. So, the biggest competitor in the US for insurers is the government. They keep taking on more and more risk themselves. It's an extraordinary thing that's going on. But all I can do is suggest if you're really, really interested in doing something about new types of insurance and delivering insurance where there isn't any, you should get in touch with the Insurance Development Forum. There's a small office, it's based in London, but it's global, covers the entire world. Insurance Development Forum, I would get in touch with them because you might be able to help them in some way. Because they're looking at this topic, that very topic.
That's a very helpful tip. Thank you so much. I'll pick up on that later.
Thank you so much, Bandeep. Great to see you.
problem.
Looking well.
Likewise. Likewise.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Guys, I'm really sorry. I know there's hundreds of questions actually. So David Thomas, Caroline, Edmund Gemmell, and so many other people. I really apologize, but we need to stick to time. And I'm just going to share very quickly the results of the poll. And if I may, I will capture your questions that are on the chat function and see if I can get you a response. I'm not promising anything, but we will try. But please feel free to email me. So here are the quick results. So interested in E2E, the winner there is the events are very informative and educational. That's all credit to my team and to the speakers. The second thing that people are looking for is meeting like-minded people. So we are running smaller sessions where everybody can chat to each other. So please join those sessions if you're interested until we go back to our physical 50 events a year. Then in terms of what would benefit you, startup and SME data intelligence. So we've got a few partners. We will make those introductions. That's the first one, but we'll introduce everybody to who they're needing. And it's close cut, 50-50. 50% of you do want access to the IWG packages and 50% of you are already well settled. So those are the results. Now, Dame Inga, if I could just say a massive thank you. There's a lineup of questions. I wish we had another half an hour with you now. But I'm conscious that everybody has dinner and their evenings to kind of move forward with. So I can't thank you enough. It has been inspirational. So really appreciate you taking the time, and we would love to have you back at some point when you've got time. But whatever we can do, there's a number of charities that you're working with. So when I send a thank you note across to everyone, I'd like to encourage people to support the things that Dame Inga's involved in. So I will put that in the follow-up email. So Dame Inga, I'll share all of that with the participants if I may. And then next week on the 6th of October in the morning, we are doing a virtual House of Lords breakfast with Lord Bill Moria and Maurice Ostro. Maurice Ostro is the Prime Minister's Special Ambassador for Entrepreneurship. I've been working with him for the last 6 months on COVID support packages. And then on the following day in the evening, we have Lawson Muncaster, the founder of City AM, and John McGlynn, who's self-made billionaire. He's one of the founding board of E2E, and so on and so forth. I'll keep everyone. There's a big calendar, another 16 events before the close of the year. So I hope you'll join us. But talk to us about capital, human, technology, and investment capital. So thank you, everybody. And Dame Inga, thank you. It's great to see you. Thank you very much. Should have a kind of applause, really, but it's difficult this way. Thank you. Bye, everyone.